Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. Very important topic, mill levies and recent legislative changes. And so we are joined by two members of the Montana Association of Counties. And Tracy's going to do a little bit more introduction, but just wanted to orient you to the work that we're going to do today. As always, we make sure that we include our disclaimer whenever we have participants and presenters who are not MSL staff. And so let's, like I said, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Tracy.
Thank you, Coley. Welcome, everyone. I am Tracy with the State Library. I think many of you on this call know me. I work with libraries around the state, and one of my duties is helping libraries with different questions they might have about the accounting or finance or even legislative changes that have come through. And of course, if you were following this 2025 legislative session, the legislature spent a lot of time on property taxes this year, and they did make some changes, and some of them may impact you if you have a voted levy. Luckily for us, we do have a connection with MACo, and it's my pleasure to introduce the other two people who are going to be really the ones presenting their knowledge and answering your questions today. We're joined by Jason Whittle, who's the Deputy Director. Jason follows the legislature very closely. I was able to attend the MACo Midwinter Conference this year, and he really did a great job of explaining what was on the table at that point in time. He is someone that is there constantly working with legislators, trying to help them understand the impact of their decisions and be an advocate for local governments. And then he is joined by Nancy Everson, MACo's Governmental Finance Director, and I work with Nancy. Those of you who are in county library systems or library districts, when you ask me a really, really hard financial question, Nancy is the one I turn to, and she is always gracious about helping me figure out the answer to your question. And so luckily for us, Jason and Nancy recognized that many public libraries around the state of Montana do have voted levies. And there are a couple of bills that may require action from you. And they're going to talk about those bills, those changes, and what you might need to do. And so with that, Jason and Nancy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. I thought we'd start today with just a general overview of the three major property tax bills that got enacted this last session, 231, 542, and then we need to talk for you all to make good decisions. We need to talk about the impacts of Senate Bill 117, which will go into effect next year. In general, what the purpose of 231 and 542 is to lower primary residential rates and therefore taxes, and in essence charge more to secondary residences, short-term rentals, and really expensive houses. Taking the burden away from, just normal Montanans that have a quote unquote normal house and push that off on folks that have two houses or don't live here and have a second home here. That was the premise behind it, to try and extract some money out of those out-of-staters that are buying up property and give some relief to Montanans. So it gets tricky in that 231 is the bill that implements this year, and 542 makes additional changes next year. And then 117 also makes some changes that impact counties next year, not so much the taxpayers, but rates, but the local government finances. In 2025, all residential property will have a tiered rate and be taxed at a lower rate. And that rate is 0.76 for the first $400,000 value. Anything above 400,000 to 1.5 million is at 1.1%, and it's tiered. And anything above that 1.5 million is 2.2%. So again, there they get the expensive houses. It changes again in 2026 in that they start, instead of using just a base $400,000 amount, they use the median statewide household value. That value right now is about, I think the last number I heard was 370, so that'll go down a little bit. You're gonna trigger the higher rate at a little bit less. And that stays at 0.76. The median to 2 times the median goes to 0.9. And the two times the median to 4 times goes to 1.1, and anything over goes to 1.9. So the relevance in that is everybody's gonna get their tax bills this year and think they got a sort of an understanding of what's gonna happen to them individually, and then it's gonna change again next year. So we need to be prepared for a 2-year transition window as these two bills come into play. In 2025, there will be a rebate. There will not be in 2026. The rebates are $400. If you qualified last time, the general rule is you're gonna qualify this time. They also lowered smaller commercial rates. Up to $400,000 commercial value gets a lower rate, and then the big commercial goes higher. Ag got a rate reduction as well. And that does not change next year. So what I get asked is what does this do? What's this really gonna do? And the answer is it depends on where you're at. If you're in Madison County, where you've got the Yellowstone Club, and you've got those super high valued homes that are gonna pay a much higher rate, the regular property owners are probably gonna see a reduction because their mill value is gonna still go up. And you're gonna shift that property tax burden from folks with $400,000 houses to the ones that have $20 million houses. If you're in Lewis and Clark County, where the certified values went down, that indicates that there wasn't enough higher rate taxpayers to take that whole burden on. And what that means at the local level is we have to raise mills. So what they saved in rate, they're gonna lose part of it in us increasing the mills per 1510-420. And I don't know how familiar you are with 1510-420, but it allows local governments to take last year's actually assess at half the average rate of inflation over the last 3 years and come up with a new mill number. So we start with last year's revenue in essence as our base point. Well, if you lower all the rates for all the taxpayers, but we still start at last year's revenue, lowering those rates doesn't have an impact because we just, instead of 100 mills, we do 120 mills to get to that number. And that comes into play when we start talking about the transition from fixed mills to either a new calculation of fixed mills or tying them to 1510-420. So in essence, what the legislature did was they lowered a bunch of rates, primary homeowners being the key and small businesses. They kept them at or raised them on larger businesses and second homeowners and short-term rentals in the hopes that they would shift some of those property taxes that way. Where there's nobody there to shift, Macomb County, for instance, it's all ag and all residential and probably doesn't have much centrally assessed, doesn't have, the big industry. There's nobody to shift to. So lowering those rates isn't going to have the same impact it will have in Webo County, for instance, where they've got a bunch of pipelines and those centrally assessed taxpayers are probably gonna see the hit and their homeowners will see some relief. So it'll be disparate across the state. We have asked DFR to send us all of the new calculations for certified values so that we can start to see where it worked and where it didn't and how much, and start to run the 1510-420 calculations. Politically, at the local level, it's gonna look like they gave a tax break and we raised the mills and took it away. And that's the dilemma that we've been discussing with county commissioners as to how they explain that to their constituents, that they didn't really raise taxes. They're following the same rules they always have followed. Any questions on sort of the premise behind 231 and 542 and sort of the 10,000-foot view of how they work?
We'll be monitoring chat, but I do have a question, Jason, although it's not actually related to libraries, it's related to the role they play in helping property tax owners. So I just wanted to ask you something that came up in the session I went to that you did jointly with the league. And that was, I think it was the Department of Revenue said that people really need to apply for that property tax rebate. It's how they kind of prove the primary ownership. Am I understanding that correctly? I say that because I know a lot of librarians helped with the last property tax rebate. And so for the folks on this call or listening who might be in that situation again, that might be helpful to know.
Yes, my understanding is the process is gonna be the same.
Okay,
My understanding is also that if you qualified last time and you haven't moved, that you're automatically qualified this time.
oh, so you don't necessarily have to apply
Absolutely.
again. Okay.
Nancy just gave me a funny look.
Okay.
Let us check on that and we'll get back to you.
That would be great. Thank you.
But
Appreciate it.
at any rate, when you get the notices, they should look the same. The process should look the same. Obviously, the big sticking point last time I think that folks had was the geocode. Nobody knew what their geocode was.
Yep.
Hopefully, having done it once, they can figure it out, but that will be something that you all will get asked about a lot. Even my mom called me and said, I don't have a clue, and so I helped her get hers done.
Yep.
But the process is the same, and then yes, you are qualified as the primary homeowner once you've gone through that.
Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you for that overview. It's helpful for understanding what they were trying to do and the nuances that it may look different from county to county.
Yeah, in essence, we don't have a sales tax, so we don't have any way to get folks that don't live here to pay.
Mhm.
This is a different approach to trying to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Time will tell. Let's see if it works. So next year, and this becomes relevant when we talk about the transition, because one of the things that we do need to transition to in 231 is fixed mill levies. And a good number of you have fixed mill levies in your counties or in your cities where you had the voters say, we're going to give the library 2 mills or 3 mills or 5 mills or whatever that number is. And you've been getting that value of those number of mills since it passed. Now you have to transition either to a recalculation of fixed mills or you have to transition to dollars and refix the mills, or you transition to dollars and you tie them to 15, 10, 420. So before we talk about what you should do there, I want to talk about 117, which is not on anybody's radar. It flew under the radar, and I managed to do that on purpose, and I'm glad I did, because I think in the long run, it transitions our rural areas into a better position and better reflects our ability to keep up with inflation and the costs of growth. Now, whether that plays out, we'll see. All we could do was model it to see what the impacts were. It will squeeze local governments a little bit, but not bad. So what 117 will do next year is it will give you full rate of inflation up to 4%. Right now, we're getting half the rate over the last 3 years. You're going to get full rate average over the last 3 years up to 4%. The downside is on newly taxable, we give some back. So on anything that's not class 4 property, 50% of the money that's collected in taxes will go to reduce mills. So in your county, if you get a large industrial project, a wind farm, a power plant or something like that, the taxpayers will benefit greatly, because half the money that company pays in is going to go to relieve the taxes on everybody else. On class 4, the county or the local government will keep 75% of the new growth, and 25% will go to the other taxpayers in the form of mill reduction. So we flipped 15, 10, 420 on its head. Before, the restriction was in inflation to hold down growth, and we got all of the newly taxable. We flipped that. We gave up some newly taxable to keep up with inflation. If your county's not growing or hasn't been growing, this is good, because because you don't have any newly taxable coming on board, you've been getting eaten up at half the rate of inflation over the last 20 years. If you're growing rapidly, Belgrade, the numbers don't pan out quite as well. But I think in the long term, when growth stabilizes, it will be better for local governments. But that 4%, up to 4% inflation makes a big difference in your 15-10-420 transition, if that's where you want to go, because you're gonna know you're gonna keep up with inflation, assuming it doesn't balloon like it did. You're in and you're out, and you're not gonna be dependent on newly taxable growth from a fixed mill levy. The other thing you won't be dependent upon is the legislature not figuring out that you, instead of, you go from 5 mills, you recalculate it and you go to 4, and going forward, you get 4, but it grows the same way your 5 mills did, and then they come in 2 sessions and say, we didn't want that, and they hamstring you again. So politically, my recommendation is just go to 15-10-420. It's one fight, we're all in it. We'll fight it together. You're gonna be protected at inflation, and protected from the hatred over fixed mill levies that the legislature has recently come across. So I think it's better long-term politically to go that route. I will say though, if you're in a growing county, refixing the mills, if they don't mess with that, you might get more money that way. But if your growth backs off, you won't. And with the change in 15-10-420 next year, you're not gonna get as much of that growth. And so fixed mills are not gonna go like they have in the past. They're gonna grow at inflation and then half of large industrial growth. With that, Nancy, do you want to walk them through the 2 options?
Yes, I will do that. I first wanted to add on to what Jason said, about the option 2. If you have a voted fixed levy and say it's 10 mills, your ballot language was 10 mills, right? In perpetuity, right? Permanently. And you reset those mills to the fiscal year 2025 calculation, and it works out to 8 mills. And you begin to levy 8 mills, and fast forward to everybody retires and leaves. Somebody new comes in and says, why is this 8 mills? And doesn't realize what had happened in the 2025 session. And so they go back to the ballot language and they're like, well, shoot, our authority's 10 mills, right? It will get so confusing, I think, in the long run, if you don't just tie everything to 15-10-420.
If you do stay with fixed, I would put another piece of paper with a memo attached to it that says, here's why we refixed it. It was 2025. House Bill 231 required it, the recalculation. We went from 10 mills to this, so that there's a document that trails that for future generations. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is 542 has not been implemented. So there's going to be another change in the rates next year. And if you fix your mills from 10 to 8 or whatever the calculation is this year, you may actually get less revenue next year when those rate changes change again. We will likely see a reduction in several counties in taxable valuations again next year because of that change. So be prepared. If you go that way, you may take another year hit before you start to see some normality in your growth thereafter.
So may I check my understanding, because this might help the librarians too, is when we talk about tying it to 15-10-420, and I'm probably oversimplifying this, but basically what you're saying is, okay, this is how many dollars our 10 mills raised, and going forward, we're gonna raise that dollar amount plus the inflation allowed in 15-10-420. And that's your recommended path versus saying our ballot language says 10. If we have to reset and we can only levy 8 mills to get that dollar amount, then we're just going to get whatever those 8 mills are worth going forward if we fix it. Am I understanding
Correct.
that? Okay.
Correct. So if you're in Ravalli County, the mill value dropped. In Lewis and Clark County, the mill levy dropped this year. If it does it again next year and you've reset to 8, you're gonna get less money next year than you got this year. If you tie it to 15-10-420, you're gonna get full rate of inflation up to 4% average over the last 3 years, plus a percentage of new growth.
Thank you. All right, Nancy, I'll turn it over to you for the options.
Sorry, Tracy, there is a question from Carmela. And she's asking, is this a permanent decision once made, or could you revert if the economic or political situation changes?
This is your chance to make your change. You have to convert to one or the other. It does not give latitude for future changes.
And then
Yeah,
who has
they're
the
not gonna let
power?
us bounce back and forth between fixed and floating.
And then the next question is, who actually has the power to decide which option to take?
So
Libraries.
it sort of depends on what kind of library you are. If you're a district, your library board needs to do a resolution and get it to the commissioners. And do the calculation. If you are, if your board is the county commission or the city council, then that's who would do it. But I think most of you have library boards, and I think that that's the route it would go through.
Couple more questions coming in. When is the deadline for the decision? Is the first one. And the second, if you want to deal with that too, can a city or county commission override a library board's decision? And again, I think it kind of depends on what type of library it is.
It does, and the language on voted mills in 1510-425 is gives the county commissioner some authority over fixed or levied mills. But there's also statute that's pretty clear on libraries and the library powers that they have, and I think that would. Let me put it this way, it would be much easier if we could come, if there was an agreement between the two entities and everybody was on the same page, then I really don't wanna see a county override that decision. What we are telling counties is to try and encourage uniformity across all the voted mills. So if the fire districts and all the other districts that have voted fixed mills wanna go one way, we're hoping everybody goes that way, so that we don't have a few that float, a few that are fixed, because that will, thinking 10-20 years out, just add more confusion to the process. So I think the best thing you could do is sit down with your commissioners and say, we're gonna run the calculations. Have you heard from any of your other districts? What are they gonna do? What do you want from us? The deadline is when you submit for your voted mills to be put on the tax rolls. You need to tell them which way you're going.
Tracy, I'll just add, I think the worst thing that could happen is that the library does nothing and puts the Board of County Commissioners in a position to have to make that decision for them. And I could argue a bunch of different ways about how that could or should happen, but I think that is the worst case of all scenarios. So if the libraries can meet, come to a recommendation, submit their mill levies as they have historically, having done by resolution or memo, indication of why they've chosen the path that they've chosen, I think that really binds the commission to follow that direction.
I appreciate that advice, Eric, and I really agree. And for those of you who are watching, that's Eric Bryson, the executive director of MACO. And it's also my understanding in talking to some county commissioners and also the League of Cities and Towns that there's a real strong recommendation to tie it to dollars rather than doing the fixed mills, because we haven't talked about House Bill 20, but going forward, any votes on levies are going to be in dollars. And I know that there's kind of a feeling that the legislature may go after fixed voted levies anyway. So I suspect libraries are just better off going with dollars and tying it to 1510-420. But I'll definitely encourage them to work with their counties and cities.
Yeah, and that goes back to my political heads up. I think fixed mills are going to probably be taken completely off the table at some point. I don't think we will be able to vote for fixed mills at some juncture, and I don't think the legislature will have a hard time passing that. And then I also think that anything that's outside of a 10-year window will also be at risk. We did hold that off this time, but levies in perpetuity are probably a thing of the past, or will be.
That's good heads up. Thank you. Cole, did we get all of the questions?
I think Mark from Bitterroot has he's included information that he received from County Finance Officer. And I just want to make sure, Tracy, if you see that, if you can kind of translate for everybody too.
Yeah, so Mark, I got a similar missive from one of your fellow library directors in Ravalli County, and that inspired this webinar because it reached out to Nancy, and I'm like, Nancy, I'm sure Ravalli County has it covered, but could you translate for me? And she said, yes, they are good to go, that you have in fact gone the pathway of option 1, as you see on this screen.
So how do you do the calculation? That's probably the next question. Nancy.
All right, we've been trying really hard to try and come up with something that lays it out as simple as it can be, because there's been a lot of confusion on how this is done. And this is what we've come up with. It's on your screen to show both of those options. So you start with your voted fixed mills and the actual assessed revenue from fiscal year 2025. And this is voted fixed mills. And I think you're going to find across the state that there's a lot of different ways maybe that these are being calculated. Like, for example, I know that the Lewis and Clark County Library already applies 1510-420. That was written into their ballot language, and they already do that. So they have not a worry in the world, right? They don't have to make a decision on this. And I think there'll probably be others that are that same way. There might be some that are a fixed dollar amount. Those don't change. So it's the voted fixed mills that we're really looking at. So in this example, say your value of your mill was 50,000 and you had 10 voted mills, and that actually assessed allowed revenue up to 500,000 up. That was $500,000. Do we want to get into allowed?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the reason I made Nancy add allowed is I think there are a couple of counties that had voted fixed mills that, because of political pressure last year, didn't levy their full authority. So if they had 10 mills they had available, they only levied 8 of them. The legislation is not clear on what you do then. Our guidance is you have the authority to go to 10. You didn't do it. That shouldn't be taken away from you in perpetuity. Do your calculation as if you had levied 10, not 8, and figure out your new fixed maximum from there.
All right, so once you have your actual assessed or allowed revenue for fiscal year 25, then you choose an option. Like we've talked about, you either reset your mills or you apply the formula for 1510-420. If you're just resetting your mills, it's just another simple calculation of your actual assessed or allowed revenue from fiscal year 25 divided by your fiscal year 2026 taxable value, which everybody just received yesterday. So you do have those new numbers. That resets your mills. In this example, we moved 10 mills down to 8 mills. That's the number you move forward with. That's your new base if you choose option 2. So now let's talk about option 1 and what 1510-420 looks like. And this is the other slide that I sent to you. This looks super ugly and confusing, but it's really not that bad. In fact, it's pretty simple. So this is out on the MACO website. This is the only place you'll find this form is on the MACO website. You can download it. It has the history. It's been the same form for 20-some years since, I think, the 2000 legislature when 1510-420 came into place, as Jason talked about. This will change slightly next year, but it will still look very familiar to this. And this form is where you calculate what your new revenue assessed or allowed is. So again, you start with your on line one, what you actually assessed in the prior year. In this case, I just picked 500,000, right? Current year inflation, this is 1/2 of the prior 3 years, 2.11%. That's applied to the 500,000. That gives you your new adjusted revenue. That's your new limit, what you're allowed to levy for. And then you enter your taxable values. These come right off of the certified value sheets that you just got from the Department of Revenue yesterday. You enter them in the yellow boxes. In this case, added total taxable value, and this is where you get to exclude your newly taxable property from the calculation and then add it back in. That does the calculation for you. So now your new adjusted taxable value per mill, $8,778, calculates out to a calculated mill levy of 58.16. That's your authorized mill levy. There's some carry forward provisions in here too, so you don't have to levy your total mill levy. You can elect to leave some of those mills back, and you're allowed to carry those forward in any future year. So if you had any of those carry forward mills, you would enter it right here on line 13. That would give you your new adjusted one. If you had any in there, this number would change. In this case, I didn't have any in there, so it stays at 58.16. Line 16, you get to make the decision. Do you want to levy 58.16 mills? Do you want to levy less? Cannot levy more unless you had carry forward mills, and that made it bigger. So then that's where it calculates down into your new base. So you can see here, your 500,000 that you started with increased by inflation up to 510,559. And then it also is increasing by the newly taxable property that you were allowed to exclude from your calculation. And that's what makes the newly taxable property then pays the same amount of property tax as your existing property tax owners. By excluding that brings you down to your new actually assessed, the number you will start with in the next year. Again, if you had carry forward mills, that's some on the table, they would fall out in this last line down there. That was a quick and dirty explanation.
If you need 58 mills to get last year's revenue plus inflation, you also charge the newly taxable the 58 mills, so that's additional revenue on top of that. That's how newly taxable plays in your growth.
And this is called the floating mill. You'll hear that referred to quite a bit, because depending on where your taxable value goes, those mills will float up and down. The higher your taxable value comes in from the prior year, the less mills you need. If your taxable value goes down, you're going to levy more mills under this formula. But again, you get to make the decision.
For those that haven't used the form before, you explain where all those numbers come from. Certified values come from DOR. Half year rate of inflation comes from DOR. Previous year's actually assessed comes from the previous year.
Yes, and again, this form will look a little bit different next year because you'll get full inflation up to 4%, and the newly taxable amounts will be different. So the certified value form has been very, very similar for the past 20-some years as well from Department of Revenue. I think it's going to look a little bit different next year with the changes to 117, but overall, it's a simple one-page form that comes out on usually the first Monday in August from the Department of Revenue that is a roll-up of all of your property in your taxing jurisdiction and the value, market value, taxable value. If you have a tax increment district included, those numbers will show, and your newly taxable.
So once the form from DFR comes for the library, And you'll have your own sheet of paper with the numbers on it for the district boundaries or this, you know, whatever your boundaries or your taxing jurisdiction boundaries are. Then it's plug and play those numbers into this. And it, in essence, with knowing what last year's numbers were, spits out your new mill levy maximum.
Yeah, this form is really, really easy. You can't mess it up.
Yeah.
You
You work
probably
with it a
can,
lot,
but
Nancy. But
We try to
luckily-
make it hard to mess up. How's that?
That's a good thing. And luckily for many of our librarians, their treasurer or their clerk will take care of this for them. But I do
Goodness.
believe some of them have to actually do this. And I think, Colette, I saw a question come up from one of our district libraries.
Yes. So Abby at the North Lake District Library in Polson is asking, in the past, we have not been allowed to float our mills. We are a library district with fixed voted mills. So now we can if we switch to 15, 10, 420. Is that correct?
So, yeah, House Bill 231 is mandating that you either recalculate your fixed number or shift to dollars and attach 15, 10, 420. You cannot, there is no option to just stay at your voted fixed amount that you have today. You have to do one of those two things.
So are there any other questions for the Mako staff?
If you're unsure, you need to go to your ballot language. Your clerk and recorder should have a record of that.
Definitely. And I think the thing I learned in this experience, Jason, is, I know in working with the Ravalli County libraries, their ballot language had the mills, and I thought that, it said levy 6 mills or approximately, and I thought that that's what made it fixed voted, but it sounds like you have to take into consideration Nancy's form. Am I understanding that correctly? Because I know in Ravalli County, it sounds like they tied it to 15, 10, 420 right from the get-go, but their ballot language makes you think it's a fixed voted levy. I don't know if you could speak to that.
So typically, if you're gonna tie something to 15, 10, 420, you're gonna include that in your ballot language. So this would be voted mills, like you went out to and asked the voters for approval for more mills since 2001, I think. Everything before that should have been either, no, that's not true. A lot of mills, unless they were specific voted, converted to 15, 10, 420 way back then. So then any voted after that, the ballot language should probably include that language that you're going to use 15, 10, 420.
Yeah.
Okay.
The problem is we're gonna be dealing with practices and ballot issues that could be decades old.
Yes.
So I think communication is important. I think you go to the clerk and say, do you have the ballot language? And you can read that and say, okay, I can read this ballot language. Are we considering this a fixed number, or have we tied it to 15, 10, 420? If you don't know, and then reaffirm what you want to do. If it's been tied to 15, 10, 420 for the last 20 years, I think you stick with that. I don't know that that's a fight anybody wants, because you would have to, that would be a can of worms I wouldn't want to open up. If it's been fixed, then you need to make a determination, but either way, I think you just reaffirm, we're tied to 15, 10, 420. Going forward, we intend to stay tied to 15, 10, 420, and then there's a record that the library got on board, the commissioners understand, everybody knows we've acknowledged 231 and we're gonna move forward with it. If you're fixed, then you need to make a formal decision one way or the other.
I put it a little different. I think you assume that what was levied in tax year 2025 was accurate. Don't go looking back any further than that. Start with what was levied in tax year 2025, assume that was accurate, and then do the conversion based on that.
Really good advice right there.
Okay.
We have another question from Livingston Park County Library. And that is, will interlocal agreements that assign mills versus dollars or percentage, will those interlocal agreements have to change as well?
If those interlocal agreements are general fund contributions, part of the already limited mill levies that the county has that they've historically granted by interlocal, that is not impacted by these bills.
Yeah, if you don't have a voted mill and the county is just setting aside or utilizing some of their general fund mill levy dollars to, 2 or 3 mills or whatever it is to help the library out, and you have an interlocal to that, this does not impact that whatsoever.
That's a really good clarification because a lot of libraries do receive some general fund money.
This is only voted fixed mills.
Yes. Which I thought I understood what that was, and then I was like, oh, maybe I don't. But now I think I got it.
Not all ballot language was written clearly. And probably not all ballot language was implemented in the way that maybe, I'm sure it got implemented in the way they understood it was going to at that time. But the ballot language may read differently, 15, 20 years later than what was implemented based on, we weren't there in those conversations and we don't know what the mission was.
Yes, that is very true. So I just want to give people a few more minutes to ask some questions, and then I thought it might be helpful to just summarize what you need to do next. But just pausing for a moment to see if there are any other questions. Which
So
thank you. Go ahead,
if
Tracy.
I was running a library, I would go to the clerk and recorder and say, will you give me a copy of the DOR certified values for the library?
Okay.
And I would go on Mako's website. And I would ask for last year's calculation as well, which you can either get from them or you can find it on D of A website. And I would plug the numbers into that form.
Okay.
I would start working the calculations. And then if you get along with the clerk and recorder, I'd ask them to do it too and make sure your numbers match up.
Okay.
And then go from there, get on the agenda for your district board, or if you have a board, and have a discussion item and some sort of formal vote on which direction to go.
Okay.
And the deadline for the county to approve all mill levies, fees and assessments that are going on the tax bills is the first Thursday after the first Tuesday in September. So, and by then and to your county.
So mid-September, not much time.
Right. Get it done at your August board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That summary is very helpful. Do we have any other questions? While we have some experts.
And I'm always available. If anybody wants to reach out to me and ask specific questions.
Thank you, Nancy.
We will email you the link to the summary that the legislative folks did. I guess we already did that. So you have that. I think you have both the forms that we just had up on the screen sent to you. We can send you a link to the 1510-420 on Mako's website as well, so that's easy access. If you have any questions, Nancy's your best bet.
Yes, Nancy's great. And I want to thank all three of you, Eric, Jason, and Nancy, for helping us with this because it is very complicated. So I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and a little bit of guidance and wisdom with all of us today.
Anytime.
We
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
the opportunity. It's important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
I'm gonna just finish up here really quickly, Tracy, just say
the
to
whole
everyone
quarter.
and reiterate that we're going to be sharing all of the resources from today with our recording and in the Aspen event for today. We always appreciate your feedback through our evaluation form. I've added the link to this form if you're not so great with snapping the QR codes, that is just fine. And then your consultants can help. Each of these individuals is here in this call today. And just a reminder to reach out if there's a question or a contact that you need to make. Please don't hesitate to reach out to your good friends, Tracy, Kara, or Corey. And we have so many things coming up in the next month. I didn't even go beyond September 9th, but we have a number of webinars. Also, the State Library Commission meets next Wednesday, the 13th, followed by a website chat with Jenny Stapp, who will provide an overview of that meeting during that time. We have a ton of new resources, and so on August 28th, we're going to have a short webinar to go through all of those things, and then continuing on in September. If you are a director or a trustee and you have not registered yet for our fall workshop, that is September 15th. And you should have received several newsletters from me over the last couple of weeks to announce that and to provide information. We really hope that you can join us. And you never know, you might be able to have a conversation about some of these really important topics, share your expertise and advice with your colleagues from across the state. And with that, you can claim credits. For those of you, I've written down all the names. I'll be going in and adding credits to your records following this session today. And also, if you like just browsing for our recordings on YouTube, you'll be able to find this recording today a little bit later this afternoon. I do my best to get those posted very promptly along with the resources. So with that, thank you so much. And we hope to see you again on the screen or in person very soon.